Hello everyone. It's time for us to talk about the rise of Islam. I've already said it a couple of times, but it's important for us to study Islam, even though this course is on the history of Christianity, because this major religion was a powerful movement that impacted the church. Not only in the 7th century, but going forward throughout the medieval era, even until today. So let's see what we can learn about its history and its doctrines. First of all, the word Islam means submission. And of course, this means submission to the one God, Allah. We'll see how this idea of submission works itself out in the pillars of Islam, those acts and rituals that are expected of the followers of this religion. All right, the background to Islam is the Arabian Peninsula. All right, it originated in what is known today as Saudi Arabia. But originally, the Arabian inhabitants were polytheistic star worshippers. They had up to 400 idols based on the stars in the sky. You see a great deal of influence from Persia and the group out of which came the Magi, who visited Jesus at his birth. All right, so these Persian star worshippers influenced these inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula. These folks were also influenced by Jewish and Christian immigrants. You can see from the location just to the southeast of Israel, and not far from Alexandria and other Christian communities. And so there's a lot of different religious influence on the Arabian culture, but largely they were polytheistic, worshiping up to 400 idols. The culture was that of a Bedouin tribal society. In other words, they traveled from place to place, migrating according to the rain, the grassy environment. They would take their flocks and go from place to place. Now, at the time of Muhammad, there were very few population centers, but Mecca was a pilgrimage center from a very early age. And the location of the Kaaba. The Kaaba, as we will see, was a shrine in the shape of a cube, curtained, and supposedly built originally by Adam and Eve, and then rebuilt by Abraham and Ishmael. As we will see, Ishmael plays a large role in the history of Islam. This shrine housed the Kaaba, which is a black stone about the size of a cannonball, possibly a meteorite. Okay, you can imagine that a meteorite falling to the ground, being viewed by star worshippers, would create quite a stir, as if it were indeed a gift from the star gods. And so the Kaaba was the focal point of the Meccan cult long before Muhammad. All right, let's talk about Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Notice that I spell his name with a U. Often you'll see the name spelled with an O, but I checked with my Islamic scholar, Dr. Mike Edens, who taught Islamic studies here for a number of years. But Mike tells me that Mohammed with an O means Mohammed is given praise. But when it is spelled with a U, Muhammad means that Muhammad gives praise. And we need to remember that Muhammad is not the focal point of Islam. Allah is the focal point. And so Muhammad does not receive praise. Instead, Muhammad gives praise to Allah. All right, Muhammad was born in 570 in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia. He was the son of a young widow, and Muhammad's father died while Muhammad's mother was expecting. And so he was raised largely by his uncle. He was a member of the Quraysh tribe. They considered themselves descendants of Ishmael, and they were priests of the local religion of 360 gods. This tribe was responsible to safeguard the Kaaba. And so Muhammad was part of a very prestigious tribe. When he was about 20 years old, he entered the mercantile service of Khadijah, who was a wealthy widow. And so his living was established, and especially when 5 years later he married Khadijah. She was 40 years old. By then he was 25. She was his only wife until after her death. Now, later on, as we will see, Muhammad will establish and practice polygamy, but he had only one wife until Khadijah died. I'm sure she would have had none of it if he had tried polygamy on when she was still alive. All right, they had 4 daughters, but only Fatima survived him. The others died young. And he achieved a certain social status as a merchant in Mecca. Now, in 611, at age 41, he had a midlife crisis. No, he had a vision, all right? And in this vision, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and appointed him to call his people back to the worship of the one true God, whom he named Allah. This monotheistic religion is that which his ancestor Abraham had practiced. And so Gabriel is instructing Muhammad to forsake the polytheism of his culture and instead replace it with monotheism, the worship of the one true God. Now, there are some contemporary critics who suggest that this vision possibly was associated with epilepsy. And indeed, Muhammad himself thought that this was a demon that had appeared to him, what the Arabians would call a jinn or genie. But when he told this story to Khadijah, she supported him and believed that the angel Gabriel indeed had called him to establish a new religion. So he finally accepted these visions as a sign that he was the divinely appointed prophet of Allah. His first converts included his wife Khadijah, his cousin Ali, Abu Bakr, who was a wealthy Meccan merchant. Ali and Abu Bakr will perform very important roles in the aftermath of Muhammad's life. Now, at first, Muhammad had little success in promoting a monotheistic religion because in Mecca, many of the merchants made a lucrative living out of producing multiple idols related to their polytheistic religion. The tourist trade from pilgrims journeying to Mecca fueled this idol making industry. And so they resented the idea that there was only one God. I'm reminded of the experience Paul had when he went to Ephesus and taught the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then he inspired the anger of the silver makers. The idol makers who made idols of silver dedicated to Diana, otherwise known as Artemis. And you remember the criticism that they aimed at Paul when their trade fell. Well, this was the same principle here in Mecca. In 619, Khadijah died. She had been Muhammad's protector, even in the midst of all this criticism. But once she died, then Muhammad was accused of sorcery and fraud. But in 622, there were those who came from the city of Yathrib, which was later renamed Medina, the city of the prophet. And these residents of this city wanted Muhammad to come to them to teach them about the one true God, Allah. They wanted to convert to Islam. And so Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina. This transition is known as the Hijrah, okay? And this date is used to begin Muslim calendars. So what we consider 622 AD, the Muslims consider the year 0, the beginning date of their religion, much like the birth of Christ is the beginning point of our calendar. So Hijrah, a very important transition, a very important moment in the history of Muhammad and Islam. Now, in Medina, Muhammad consolidated his religion, and he was acknowledged as the leader with divine authority. He established a community there based on a charter of faith, not old tribal loyalties. So this is the genius of Muhammad and Islam. Whereas before, they'd been a multitude of tribes worshiping a multitude of star gods. Now he was consolidating them into one religious people following Islam. And so again, we see how religion is used to unite people. Now, Yathrib was a power base for Jewish settlers in the Arabian Peninsula. And there were 3 powerful Jewish tribes, all wealthy merchants. Of course, there were a number of Arabs in the community, but these were used as a labor force. And so the upper echelon was Jewish, and they created an alliance with Muhammad. So Muhammad, due to this alliance with the Jews, accepted the Abrahamic roots and took on the Jewish practice of praying toward a holy city. Originally, he prayed toward Jerusalem, but the time would come when the Jews deserted him in battle. In fact, in 627, at the Battle of the Trench, Jews deserted Muhammad. And so, in the aftermath of this betrayal, he rejected the Jews and he rejected the practice of praying toward Jerusalem. And at that time, he received a new vision with new instructions, and he was inspired to pray toward Mecca. This is known as the Qibla, the direction of prayer that you desire. All right, and so this is, of course, a very important pillar in Islam today, praying toward Mecca. In fact, in a contemporary mosque, there always is a niche carved out to mark the direction of prayer. Okay? There's an app for that. All right, no matter where you are, this app will tell you the direction of Mecca. Now, Muhammad eventually turned his attention toward the conquest of Mecca, and there were three significant battles fought. The Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, and the Battle of the Trench, which I just mentioned. And this was the key battle that established the superiority of Muhammad's forces out of Medina. And in 629, he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, but the elders of the city came out to meet him and begged him not to enter as a conqueror, and that if he would return, they then would welcome him. And so the next year in 630, he returned to Mecca and was proclaimed the master of the city. All right, now even beyond this conquest, he remained in Medina and stayed there until his death in 632. All right, an important year in the history of Islam, the death of Muhammad. All right, having looked briefly at Muhammad's life, it's time to turn our attention to the religious principles of the religion of Islam. As I'm sure you are aware, the sacred scriptures of Islam are called the Quran. When I was growing up, this word was transliterated Quran. You can see the difference, but the first spelling is the more accepted spelling today. The Quran consists of revelations from Allah to Muhammad, mediated through Gabriel, over a 20-year period. Muhammad's successor was Abu Bakr, and he ordered that these revelations and oral traditions be preserved. All right, and so the idea was that they would be preserved, sacrosanct, inerrant, in the perfect heavenly language, which is Arabic. In fact, the Quran is intended only to be written in Arabic, although, of course, it's been translated into numerous languages by today. The Quran teaches one God, Allah, and the final revelation of His will, which completes the work of the prophets. As you may know, Muhammad is considered the final prophet, but the Quran recognizes previous prophets, which are also honored in Judaism and Christianity. There is a second collection of sacred writings called the Hadith, and these are more practical instructions. When you see them, they sound more like our Proverbs. There are actually thousands of Hadith and two different compilations, so one by al-Bukhari and another one by a man named Muslim. All right, not to be confused with a follower of Islam, a Muslim. This is the name of one of the compilers or editors of the Hadith. There are about 13,000 Hadith in total. 3,000 of them are shared in common between these two versions. Now, Islam recognizes other peoples of the book, the Jews who have their Hebrew scriptures and the Christians who have their New Testament. So, whenever the Muslims would conquer a new territory, they would force pagan Arabs to convert, but they would not place such coercion on Christians and Jews. Instead, they were treated as second-class citizens. They had to pay higher taxes, and they had a number of prohibitions placed on them, but they did not force them to convert. Now, you'll recall that there were some fringe Christians, Monophysites and Nestorians, who preferred Muslim rule to the persecution of the Byzantines. Now, the Muslims did place restrictions on Christians, and these are outlined in a document called the Pact of Umar. Umar was the second caliph after Abu Bakr, who followed Muhammad. And there's a number of restrictions placed upon the Christians, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them. And the Christians were forced to agree to this unilateral instruction from Umar and the Muslims. All right, Christians shall not build in our cities or in their neighborhoods any new monasteries, churches, convents, or monks' cells. So no new churches. We shall not repair by day or by night any of our buildings that fall in ruins or that are situated in the quarters of the Muslims. Okay? We shall not manifest our religion publicly, nor can we convert anyone to it. Okay? We shall not prevent any of our kin from entering Islam if they wish it. Okay, so here is the situation for evangelism. Christians were allowed to evangelize their children and bring them into the Christian faith, but if any of their children wanted to convert to Islam, the Christians were not allowed to prevent it, and they were not allowed to evangelize among the Muslims. We shall show respect toward the Muslims. We shall rise from our seats when they wish to sit. Okay? We shall not seek to resemble the Muslims by imitating their garments. We shall not speak as they do, nor adopt their surnames. All right? We shall shave the front of our heads. All right? Now, you can see that the front of my head is shaved, but that happened naturally, not in any relationship to the Pact of Umar. All right? And then we shall not display our crosses or our books in the roads or markets of the Muslims. And when it's time to call people to worship, we shall only use clappers, wooden instruments, and clap them very softly. No more bells ringing in Muslim territories. Now, even today in Israel, though the Israelis are in full control of Israel, nonetheless, they have made a number of concessions to the Muslims in order to keep some level of peace in their nation. And so the Pact of Umar prohibits the ringing of church bells anywhere in Israel except in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. But on the other hand, the Muslims build their mosques as close as possible to Christian shrines and Jewish synagogues. And of course, 5 times a day, they broadcast their call to prayer. So, obviously, very different rules for the Muslims versus the Christians and the Jews. Now, Muslims are those who submit to the will of the one true God and His written word. So you see the verbal a similarity between Muslim and Islam, and both words have contain the idea of submission. And leaders are laymen who understand God's word and interpret it. There's no ordination for Muslim leaders. They are bivocational. There are seminaries in Egypt and Iran, and schools that are built up around the Ayatollahs among the Shiites. There are Islamic scholars with PhDs, and so these Muslim leaders are well educated, but not ordained or set apart in the way that Christian leaders are. Now, in Islam, there is direct access to God's word. There are no rites or sacraments from priests. There is a simple plan of salvation through obedience and good works. But there is no assurance of salvation in Islam, as we'll discuss in just a minute. In Islam, the sin problem is not human rebellion against God. Instead, the sin problem is ignorance, and the solution is knowledge. And so be sure to understand this. The Quran is the equivalent to Jesus, because it explains how to live in a right relationship with God. So for Islam, salvation is in the Quran, not in Muhammad, not in any person. It is in the book. All right, the human free will and the sovereignty of Allah are prominent in Islamic doctrine. No total depravity. Humanity is basically good. Allah, however, is sovereign, meaning he is capricious. He forgives whom he chooses. So again, as I said, there's no assurance of salvation, only the fear of God. Back in 2009, during my first trip to Israel, one of my fellow pilgrims was Barry Busby. At the time, he was chief of police here at the seminary. And Barry ended up in a conversation with two Muslims at a coffee shop, and in discussing Islam and Christianity, he said, "Tell me how to know that I am going to paradise." Well, the Muslim could not answer that, and when Barry persisted in asking how this Muslim had assurance that he was going to paradise, the Muslim became belligerent, and all he could say was, "Fear Allah and his messenger." And so the emphasis in Islam is on honor and shame, not on guilt and innocence. And again, there's no guarantee of salvation, because Allah is capricious. And you may obey all of the Quran, you may live according to its teachings, you may fulfill all of the pillars of Islam, but nonetheless, you have no assurance of salvation under Islam, because Allah can choose or reject you to come into paradise. Now, there are 5 pillars in Islam. First is the confession of faith. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Okay? So Muhammad is not God, he's not divine, but he is the messenger of the God Allah. All right, Muslims are to pray 5 times a day. This is a submission of time. The prayer times are morning, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and the evening meal. And then once a week at noon on Friday, there's community prayer at the mosque. All right, another pillar is gifts. to care for the needy. This is a submission of their resources. I asked Mike Edens once about Islamic charities, and he says that a devout Muslim is going to give 2.5% of the increase of income for the poor and for the spread of Islam. Okay, and so gifts are given not only to the poor, but to those organizations that are committed to spread Islam, such as the Red Crescent. That is their answer to the Red Cross. All right, another pillar is fasting in the holy month of Ramadan, the submission of mind and body. Okay, they follow a lunar calendar, and so Ramadan takes place 28 days from the new moon, and Ramadan can really float into any month of the calendar year. Ramadan takes place from sun up to sundown, and so there is no eating during those hours, and during that time the Muslim is to think about Allah. Nothing enters the body, no food, no water. You cannot hold hands. But come the evening, and between sundown and sun up, then there are 3 big meals. Okay, and during this time, often the celebrants watch a TV soap opera called Sohar. They recite the Quran. They nap. They eat a small meal, so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting method of celebration, but nonetheless, they fast during the day, they feast during the night. All right, the 5th pillar is a pilgrimage to Mecca in Arabia, and this is submission to the true community of God in the world. It's drawn from all nations. This is called the Hajj, the pilgrimage. This is required one time in a lifetime if able. All right, so not everyone is able to fulfill the Hajj, but it is prescribed for those who are able. And you can see in this illustration the Kaaba. See what I mean about the cube? And there are curtains around, in these four walls. And look at the people that crowd in to this arena, so to speak. All right, there are other Islamic principles. You're familiar with the term jihad, which literally means exertion or effort. And in a broad sense, is considered the 6th pillar. Now, there is an inner aspect of jihad, which means that one exerts oneself for piety. But in the outer aspect, there is a desire to bring the entire community into a submission to the pattern established in Medina. In a very narrow sense, jihad is a holy war, an armed struggle to advance Islam. And so terrorists have used this term to justify their acts of violence against others in an attempt to exert them toward Islam or punish them for failing to follow Islam. Another term that we hear today is Sharia. Is the word for the way. And this is an Islamic law which unites political and religious rule where it has its sway. So this is a perfect union of church and state, or I should say religion and state. We see this in Saudi Arabia and Iran. In America, there are many who fear Sharia law, and in places where there is a large Muslim community, there's some who have actually passed uh, rules, laws for their constitution to forbid Sharia ever being made law in American communities and states. All right, other Islamic principles would say that there are 3 or 4 messengers. Certainly Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Some Islamic leaders claim that David is also a messenger. There are a number of prophets, up to 2,600, including Old Testament and New Testament heroes, as well as some Hindus. Their theology includes a final resurrection and judgment, an understanding of angels and demons, and eternal life in paradise or hell. There's no priesthood, as I said. All men are equal. Women are intended to keep their men faithful. And then another principle is polygamy. After Khadijah died, Muhammad had a new revelation that permitted polygamy. Joseph Smith had a similar revelation as he was formulating the religion of Mormon. But today, Muslims are allowed a maximum of 4 wives, and all are to be treated equally. All right, I want to talk about the political and religious subdivisions of Islam. First of all, I want to talk about the Sunnis. They are centered around Arab tradition, and in fact, the word comes from a traditional safe route from one oasis to another. If you're living in a desert wilderness, it's very important to know how to get from one water supply to the next. And so the Sunnah is that trail between oases. If you vary off that trail, you will die. And so in the same way, Muslim tradition is that Sunnah, that safe route. There is an abhorrence of any deviation because of the danger to the community. All right, the Sunni emphasize the Quran and the tradition of the Prophet found in the Hadith. These are sayings attributed to Muhammad. And they follow the successors to Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's father-in-law. Okay, he was the father of one of Muhammad's wives. I should say before I leave this topic that there are 1.5 billion Sunnis. So by far the largest, 90% of the Muslims are Sunnis. You see the way that they're dressed. We see the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia. All right, the Shiites. This group is person-centered, and they believe that their religious leaders must be descendants of Muhammad and must be worthy. And they followed Ali, who was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. He married Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. In the history of Muhammad's death and aftermath, the story is told that Abu Bakr sent Ali from Mecca to Medina for the funeral. And then when Ali returned to Mecca, Abu Bakr had declared himself the caliph, the leader, the successor to Muhammad. Well, this of course angered Ali and those who supported him. Abu Bakr then was succeeded by Umar, but Ali became the caliph thereafter. But then Ali was assassinated, and then there was a great division among the Muslims that led to the Sunnis and the Shiites. the Shiites are more volatile because they are centered around personalities, whereas the Sunnis are centered around tradition. And it is in the Shiite division of Islam that we have ayatollahs, and they can change direction radically, as did Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. The Shiites believe in a hidden imam, that is the true imam, the last descendant of Muhammad. They believe that he will return. This idea is similar to the idea of the Jewish Messiah. And so each Ayatollah may be the hidden imam, and so each one has tremendous authority. And because of their strong personality, they can shift the Shiites more quickly than the Sunnis, who are more established in tradition. There are 150 million Shiites, so a much smaller sect, and you can see they wear the turbans that are traditional in places like Iran. Now, after Muhammad's death in 632, we have a series of caliphs who are great military leaders. And again, the genius of Muhammad was taking these scattered Bedouin tribes following a multitude of gods, and he united them under the banner of Islam. And when these peoples came together as one group of Muslims, they were a power to be reckoned with. And so, for the next 100 years, they advance in a series of conquests. 638, they took Jerusalem. By 640, they'd mastered that entire region. All right, then they went west and invaded Egypt. By 695, they mastered all of North Africa. Then they turned their attention to the east. They conquered the Persian Empire, and by 711, they had invaded Spain. And so you see, they conquered much of what had traditionally been considered territory of Christendom. Now, let's talk about their occupation of Jerusalem and its aftermath. When the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, they entered the city and they found the Temple Mount to be barren. Even though the empire was Christian, they had never built any Christian shrine, church, temple, nothing on the Temple Mount, because Jesus had said, not one stone will remain upon another. So they took that as a decree or a prophecy. And so the Muslims utilized the Temple Mount to build, number one, Al-Aqsa, a considerable mosque, but more importantly, they built the Dome of the Rock. This was built around 691. You see, it's a beautiful building covered with beautiful tiles, and a gold-plated dome. Underneath the dome is the rock. Okay, the rock is the place on top of Mount Moriah, where in the Bible it says Abraham offered up Isaac, but according to Islam tradition, Abraham offered up Ishmael. Now, this rock later on was the threshing floor of Araunah, which King David bought, and then it became the site of the first temple built by Solomon. And so this rock was the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. You may not be able to see it, but there is a rectangular indention where it is believed the ark rested. Okay, now this rock, of course, was exposed after the temple was destroyed by the Romans. There's a great tradition in Islam that one night Muhammad was called upon to mount his stallion and ascend into heaven, into a paradise, I should say. And his horse leaped from Mecca, landed in Jerusalem, skidded, and then he ascended into paradise where he met with Allah. The place where the stallion landed first was the site of Al-Aqsa. But second, he landed on the rock of Moriah, and that is why the Dome of the Rock was built there, and the Rock of Moriah is what the Dome of the Rock is named for. So the Muslims took the site of the Jewish temple to build their shrine. They created a dome at the top that is the exact measurements of the dome at the top of the Christian Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The difference is they covered their dome with gold. And so the Dome of the Rock symbolizes to the Muslims the superiority of Islam to both Judaism and Christianity. But this is why we will probably never see a third temple until a time of great war between the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims. This is why this site is so holy to all three religions. Now, let's look at the spread of Islamic power. Within 100 years, Islam spread north through the Holy Land, east through Persia, west across North Africa, and even into Spain. Occupying approximately half of the territory traditionally considered Christendom. Islam continued to spread west and north as they conquered Spain and then entered into the kingdom of the Franks with the intention of conquering the Franks and moving into Europe from the west. But Charles Martel, the Hammer, defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours in 732, thereby stopping Islamic advance. We'll talk more about Charles Martel later on. But you can see how Islam spread and dominated the region, thereby stopping the spread of Christendom. And so that is why it had such an impact on Christianity. There was the loss of major Christian holy places. All of the holy places in the Holy Land were inaccessible because Islam had taken over that territory. There was the loss of Carthage. This is the origin of Latin Christianity. But nonetheless, now it is a Muslim city. And so there was opposition to Christianity in Africa, Spain, Persia, and Eastern Europe. And so Christianity spread instead along a north-south axis from the British Isles to the Frankish Kingdom and Italy. And then, of course, ultimately, Islam led to the Crusades. And we will have much to say about the Crusades later on in the semester. And so there you see the rise of Islam, the impact on Christianity, and why it's important for us to understand the rise of Islam in order to understand the history of Christianity. But of course, it's also important for us to know about Muhammad and Islam in order to have conversations with Muslims, which need to be respectful but also knowledgeable in order to discuss with them their religion and the true gospel that is found in Jesus Christ alone, and especially the assurance of our salvation by grace through faith in Jesus alone. So I hope this has been a meaningful and informative lecture. And when we return, we'll look again at the medieval church and the relationship of church and state. So thanks for your attention today.